All right. We are now live.
Yeah.
So first, I just want to say hello to everybody out there. My name is Christopher Cusson. I'm captain of the U.S. Brig Niagara. Unfortunately, Niagara isn't able to sail this year, but here we are. We're doing what we can. So I'm also joined by Captain William Sabatini, the executive director and fleet captain of the Flagship Niagara League.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us, Billy. And we have Joe Lengieza, also a captain and the director of sail trading for the Flagship Niagara League.
Hello, internet people.
And then we have the man that we're talking to today. The reason why we've gathered, Captain Walter Rybka, who's been with Niagara since 1991, and PHMC, recently retired as the site administrator of the Erie Maritime Museum, and he's been sailing well over 40 years, I imagine, and hopefully he'll be talking to us about that, and here to answer any questions anybody has, and really the goal here for this time with Walter is really just to have him tell us stories and tell us about his time on Niagara, and especially the early years of how Niagara got started and how he got involved. So thank you for being willing to do this, Walter. Appreciate it. And
That's fun.
happy to have you. And first, I guess my question would be, I would like to share with everybody how you got started in traditional sail.
Well, I was living in Summit, New Jersey at the time, and this was while I was in college. I went to school in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is about as far from saltwater as you can get. Went to McAllister, studied set design, lighting design. A lot of theater technology is using sailors' knots and lines and rigging methods to move scenery around. And so I ended up reading a lot of billiards and all that, and learning what I could from books about ships, but I really didn't have any experience and just didn't know if I'd ever get the chance. And I was home one summer between my senior and junior and senior years, and my mother showed me an article in the newspaper that South Street Seaport Museum was just getting started on. Well, they were just getting started, period. I think they were founded in '66 as a little bootstrap operation. But they acquired the Wavertree and brought it to New York, and we're hoping to get it rigged up. So I thought this might be a good chance to get a job as a rigger's apprentice. And I went down there to inquire and look around, and I found that there were no condition whatsoever to do that. In fact, I got a letter from Norma Stanford telling me that, but saying, well, if you go on to volunteer, that would help. And so I was painting houses that summer to make some money for tuition, but I took one day a week to go into the city. I take the train in to Manhattan and go to South Street and do a little scraping or painting on Wavertree. And then one day, one of the crew painted the floor of the tool room first thing in the morning, the deck plate in the tool room, so it was hard to get at anything. So I said, well, what else is there to do? So he said, well, there's the schooner Pioneer's getting ready to sail. I hadn't even seen her yet. Because I walked up from the south and seen Wavertree first, and Pioneer was rafted to Ambrose, and so I was hiding her. I went over there and introduced myself to the captain. It was a young guy named Joe Madison, and asked if he needed a hand. And he was clearing out the hold of just dunnage timber and old tires and fenders and stuff like that. And so I gave him a hand. And he was trying to get the boat ready to put bunks down there, pipe racks. And they had this idea that the ship could do cruises for city youth, like a fresh air program at sea. There was a program they used to have there called Fresh Air. Maybe they still do, for New York kids to get them out of the city in the summer. And so Pioneer was the well-intentioned, sort of half-baked at the time idea of providing a summer program for about 20 kids and a couple of counselors. And we had a crew of, I think, 5 on the vessel.
All right. What remind us what year was that again, Walter? You said
1970.
70.
Yep.
Okay.
70. And so that fall, I went back to finish my senior year at McAllister. But then the next summer, I went back to Pioneer. And that fall was the first fall of my life that I didn't have to be in a school. And so I stayed with the ship until we later up. And then they used to have what was called the Mayor's Cup race in New York for schooners in October, late October. And they had a lot of visiting vessels. And this one rafted up to us at the seaport for a few days. And her name was Neris, Neris. She was a 70-foot staysail schooner. It was slim as a needle, fast as a witch, and wetter than anything else you could imagine. She just dove right through waves. But she'd been built in 1917. I talked my way into a berth going down to St. Thomas on her. That was my first ocean voyage, was crossing from South Street to Bermuda and then down to St. Thomas on this vessel.
What was the name of it again?
Neris, like siren spelled backwards. It was Neris.
Yep.
And
yeah, the Neris. Okay.
yeah. She'd been in the Chesapeake for a number of years. I think her seams had filled up with mud, and we got out, and it's blown a bit. And not bad. Actually, something spectacular. Good sailing. We're getting 9-10 knots and 5-6 foot sea and more. And then she started opening up, and the gas pump died. And then it was 10 minutes out of a watch on the pumps, and then it was 15 and 20. And after a couple more days, it was about a half hour out of every watch went to pumping. And we just realized we were increasing the time on the pump all the time. And it was not too bad under that weather. We realized, if we run into a storm, if we run into anything really bad, if this kicks up, this bucket's going to drop out from under us. Fortunately, we got to review it in time. It didn't happen. But that was one of my first lessons in how naive I was about some older wooden ships.
So for that trip, were you paid crew at that point, or were you?
No, I was a volunteer. Right?
So what was your first paid position?
I was on Pioneers.
Pioneer. Okay. And was Pioneer your first command?
Yeah, it was 4 years later. After 4 seasons in her, I started sailing as master the last couple of trips of the year in November of 74.
Okay. So, and then from your time with us, how long were you with the South Street Seaport and Pioneer for?
Well, all told, it spanned 6 years, but full time there was only from about 74 to 76. I was captain. Before that, I was seasonal. In the winter, I'd go elsewhere. But 74, 75, 75, 76, I was working into a job as ship manager for the smaller ships in the fleet, trying to work out restoration plans and prioritize their needs and getting surveys done in company with an ABS surveyor. So I learned a lot from that. It was like doing a tutorial from them.
Okay. And then, from your time with the South Street Seaport, did that kind of, obviously you were sailing on other vessels as well. Did that kind of transition you into Ellissa? Could you talk about, how
I did. Well, Ellissa had been sort of percolating along since 74 for 2-3 years there. It took a little while for the Historical Foundation to work out how to buy the vessel. And then they got a lot of donated materials and some cash contributions. And then the summer of 77, I left South Street and at the end of 76 and worked on, it was really, South Street was kind of having a hard time then. It was really, they were laying off people left and right. And I learned from the ABS surveyors just how dire the situation was. And we had ships like the Ambrose, not Ambrose, but the Hart, a ferry, smaller ferry in New York, that's an old ship that was used as the classrooms for the Pioneer Marine School. And I think it'd spring a rivet or pop a plate and things that happen. She'd start trying to sink herself every time you give her a chance. usually at 4:45 on a before a 3-day holiday weekend. And but so it looked like I could spend the rest of my life there with my crew and not get very far along on the ships, because the ships needed really millions of dollars, and I had 2 guys armed with chipping hammers, and so I decided to leave and do them. And Greece looked appealing. It's interesting to go someplace, different ship, different project, and so I went to the Ellissa, and I started out as just an assistant to the project director, Michael Kramer, who was organizing it. And he was an idea man, but really didn't have much experience on the practical side of things. And I don't know that I did either. I mean, the thing is that I had about 6 years of doing general carpentry and repairs and trying to keep a ship going, and a couple of years as master pioneer, but that was pretty thin credentials. And but it stood me well, that experience. It was what gave me the confidence to even think about taking on Ellissa. And when I joined Ellissa, all I hoped for was to maybe get to lay decks or do some work like that and sail back as an AB. But it turned out that she needed a far bigger rebuild, total rebuild, 30% of the shell, and one thing led to another, and finally, by the time I got back to Galveston 2 years later, I was the restoration director, and entirely by the last man standing method of promotion, which I don't recommend. But is, I mean, nobody else really knows that much about how to do this either, so might as well give it a try.
Walter, can you tell us about that meeting that you went to? I think this was before the Ellissa restoration started. And you were the young guy that stood up and said, "We need to start sailing these ships." I think you talked about that.
Yeah, that wasn't before the Ellissa. It was just before the Ellissa got towed to Galveston. It was after we'd done the work in Greece, and there was a $5 million kitty from somewhere that was available for maritime preservation grants. And the National Trust at that time had a maritime division, and they wanted input from the field. They said they'll have an open meeting in Washington, such and such a date. So everybody down in Galveston agreed I ought to go there. And I met, that's where I met Carl Cordum, who founded the San Francisco Maritime Museum. And Cordum was arguing about, we have to make a grand statement with this money. It sounds like a lot, but it's really not. And he's right there. And he said, well, don't fritter it away in a lot of little projects for little repairs here and there and small grants and small educational programs. Do something big. And he wanted to bring back the Vicar of Bray and some other ship from the gold rush era that was in the Falklands as a hulk, a wreck ashore. And he wanted to put these in a building, specially built theater in San Francisco, so they'd be inside, preserved indoors, and have lights come up on them and music, and have this show based on a gold rush. And thought that'd be very exciting and dramatic. And I said, well, I don't think so. I think it's more important to have skills preservation. Anything you build, it's eventually going to rust or rot away, and it's more important to have people have the knowledge passed on, and have people who learn how to do this and can pass it on. And he got up on his feet as soon as I finished that and said,
Can I interrupt just for a second? I want everyone to write that down. Anything you build is just going to rust or rot away, and it's the people and the knowledge passed down is what matters. I think that's a very important quote for what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, and then, so he jumps up and says, the gentleman from Texas is wrong. And we stumped on each other's toes pretty good that meeting. And later on, Carl got to be a very good friend. He was a great help to the project, a great help with research. But when that first meeting, we didn't have any use for each other whatsoever. And Corey Kramer, who was the founder of Sea Education Association, he pitched in, took my side. He said, at SEA, we say that heritage preservation is attitude preservation. I don't know if you heard that. He said heritage preservation is attitude preservation. Way of looking at things. So, but we eventually got that federal grant went, the larger share went to Constellation and needed a couple of million for dry docking. And then Niagara got 500,000, not Niagara, Ellissa got 500,000, which had to be matched, and almost didn't make it, but we did. It was a big help finally. And the rest of it went around the country. But eventually we got Ellissa done by just a lot of perseverance, a lot of sticking to it, and just figuring things out. It was like this big jigsaw puzzle trying to figure out what the original designer had in mind. We had some photographic evidence, we had some archaeological evidence from position of rivet holes in the ship and cutouts for stovepipes and different things, and some of the deck gear. But that was quite a mystery to solve. And that was actually the most exciting thing I've ever done, is work on Ellissa, because that was like building a new ship, only a little more work than building a new one, because you take apart the old one. And you know, I didn't. It was a job I wasn't really qualified for, but looking around, I didn't think anybody else was that qualified. Nobody else was lined up to do it, certainly not for the pay they were offering. And so I thought I've got as good a chance as anybody, and get right in. Then we started sailing, and we realized that well, the first set of sails was just a thank you to the donors, because they promised that the ship would sail somehow. And then the next year it was again like thank you to donors. And after a couple of years, we took it to Corpus Christi in '85 before we went to New York in '86. And the Corpus Christi trip was similar to Niagara trips now. Before we had the SSV certificate, you'd make money as an attraction vessel. You got paid for being there by a sponsor. And they'd bring in this thing, which nobody had seen anything like it in Corpus Christi for 100 years or whatever. And, well, actually, since Constitution had been there in her tow around the U.S. in the 1930s, she stopped there. But anyway, this is now '85. And we found that you really can't run museum ships off the gate receipts, ticket receipts from visitation. It just isn't enough. And the ship will invariably start falling apart on you. And you have to sail them to create the excitement, the interest. And that's just on a practical level. Never mind philosophy about sail training, passing on knowledge, just to keep enough interest in the thing. It's got to get underway now and then. And so that was our theory at any rate. And this first few years we sailed Ellissa, she didn't have an engine. She had one for years as a motor vessel, but in restoration, we've taken that out. And did not put the next one in, so we had to have a tow. And we had a tug follow us down to Corpus Christi. It was like almost 300 miles down the coast, and we went 150 miles offshore to get off the continental shelf, so there weren't so many oil rigs to hit. And sailed for 2 or 3 days, just maneuvering and learning the ship. And that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And Dan Moreland was chief mate, I was second, and Admiral Paul Welling sailed her one way after Jay Bolton, a tanker captain who had also been in the Coast Guard, and sailed down there. So that was Ellissa. I'm so glad she got to make a voyage or a passage each way. A voyage as an engineless sailing ship, because on the way home it was honking about 30 knots, and she really flew. And she went if she'd been dragging a prop. And so that was good. And but we also realized that if we're going to do trips on a regular basis, having a tug that can't keep up with a ship or is a half-tide rocket in good sailing weather, that's not going to work either. And so we really needed to get auxiliary power back in the ship, and that came in. The funding for that came in '86, just before the voyage or the rededication of Statue of Liberty in New York, 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty building. And So we took Alyssa up to that, and that was a good trip. We had to motor a lot, but it was still a very good trip and good for the ship to get that much publicity and awareness. But then,
and then Walter, I was going to ask, how long were you with Alyssa for?
it spanned totally 14 years, but the first 2 of it was in Greece, and then 3 more buildings, finishing restoration, and Galveston, and then we kept running out of money, and then things would slow down. But then when we finally got the project reorganized and on a good footing, David Brink leading it. David Brink was a good friend of mine, and he'd been my boss in South Street. He'd been the director of the Fine and Marine School. And actually, the best thing I could do at Alyssa that made the job possible was I got to hire my own boss. So I persuaded his brother Peter to drop his objections to having his brother on the payroll and say, look, David has skills that are needed for this. He's done fundraising before for projects, and you need him. And those things that I can't do, and or at least not keep doing everything else. So David came down and convinced him that, well, we really need to finish this project in about 2 years. Really, it ought to take 3, but it's going to take 2 more because it's already been going on for about 6. People are getting tired. If we drag it out over 3 years, the overhead's more. It'll cost another $500,000. And so we got to finish it in 2. So that was kind of the one thing that made some sense in one sense, but was very difficult for us, was that we had this deadline to meet of when the ship would be open to the public. And we didn't make completion, but we got her complete enough to look like it. You know, she was fully rigged and didn't have a focus leg round. Things like that were missing, but we put that on over the course of the summer. So we opened her July 4th, 82, and then after Labor Day, went on day sails 4 days. And I was in 82. Then starting in 83 to 90, 83 to 90, I worked as a consultant to GHF. I supervised the sail training for the crew, dockside, and then any dry dockings, any repairs or additions to the ship. But that was about 2-3 months a year. And then the rest of the year, I sailed with SEA, with Californian Nautical Heritage Society or other vessels. I was just trying to build my license time to, I had a 100-ton ticket from Pioneer, try anything bigger. You know, or if there's a 500-ton ticket, I needed other larger vessels. So I worked at that. I wasn't making very much money, but I had the liberty to just say, like, hang a sign on my door. It said, gone fishing or something, and gone to sea, and be back in 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, whatever it was. That's what I did for 7 years. And the last 2 seasons that at that time Alyssa was doing, the only sailing she did, well, she did some sails that were longer. She did the Gulf Coast tour from Brownsville to Pensacola, all the little ports. That was in 89. And 88, 87, 86 was the New York trip. And then 87 was to Biloxi and Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And, so she was doing some sailing then, but then at least every year she did a day sail series of like 2 weekends and the week in between, about 8-10 days in a row. And so I was master on the last 2 years of that. See, sailing Alyssa was, I had to work right out of the box because, well, it was a high exploitation, but so we had to train the crew at the dock, and much like Niagara that first season. And so I was very fortunate in that the policy that we could establish at GHF, Galveston Historical Foundation, was that until until I worked up to it, all the captains of Alyssa had been ex-Eagle captains. They were retired Coast Guard, and they'd all sailed Eagle. And so I was fortunate to get a first-hand tutorial in squibbing from them. And then by 90, it was, we had another grant, so we did another shipyard period for the ship and put watertight bulkheads in and did everything she needed to get an SSV certificate at that time. And although they did pursue it. But then it was clear that I wasn't getting more work from GHF for a while. So I was looking around for something else to do that summer. And 91, and then I found that the Niagara had been built and launched, and she'd been sailed on a one-day sea trial, towed out, and sailed for about 3 hours in 90, and then was brought back in. And they were looking for somebody to be captain of her. Now, at first I wasn't too interested because they really weren't very serious about the job, because they were only looking for a 100-ton ticket and only looking for like 2 days a week to oversee the maintenance crew, which was two guys we called Tweedledum and Tweedledee, the two custodial guides who didn't know anything. And the site administrator was pretty miserable because he had no maritime background. It was a pretty, not a very comfortable situation, but then a little later they see what happened in fall of 90 after they laid the ship up after this one-day sea trial. The League took some admissions money which they had earned, some given towards the ship, and they brought Dan Moreland and Richard Bailey and Dana Hewson from Mystic and Jan from Fire Baltimore and Dan Moreland, who was Captain Ernestine at the time, her restoration director. They brought these guys to a meeting in Erie and said, what's it going to take to run this ship? And so they got a pretty good idea of the level of qualification, the number of people it take, and what it take to maintain it. And from somewhere, and I don't know where it was, but somehow the PHMC at the time put $400,000 into a grant to the League for the summer '91 to sail the ship, and that was plenty of money. And the real problem with that was that I came up here in April at their invitation. They sent me a ticket to come up for a job interview. I flew into Erie, and that was kind of a weird situation because before I left Galveston, I've been getting calls in the morning at 7 o'clock from Erie time saying, should the ship have an engine? And well, I wasn't on it back to me because I didn't know. It's like, what they want to do with it? What were their priorities? They want a museum ship that just went out once or twice a year? Do they really want the ship to campaign and go places? And so I knew that was going to be kind of politically divisive here in Erie, so I just put that off and said, I'll let you know after I've seen the damn shooting and talk to the principals. And so I flew up here, and Mark Wells picked me up. He was somebody who had sailed on Sea Cloud once and had an idea that something what was required to sail a ship. And so he drove me around. We went down, looked at the ship, and had dinner. And with the PHMC team, which was Jack Layhow, who was the division chief, and Robert Eaton was an historian, retired Navy, and another guy who Michael Ripton, who was the real instigator of getting Niagara rebuilt. They told me that you're going to be a contractor to the League. The League's going to hire you and they'll pay you, but you're going to take your orders from us. And so it was all right. And then I went to a League board meeting who assured me that they were in charge and I didn't have to listen to what PHMC had to say. And that was kind of weird. And the next morning, we looked at the ship some. The next morning, I still got another call. So should the ship have an engine? And then finally, we had a press conference at the Erie Club, which was a luncheon and press. And so people are asking about an engine. I'm telling them, well, it depends on what you want to do with the ship and all that. And I can sail it without an engine. I sail Maryland Dove and Ellissa sailed without one. But if you want to go places a lot, then it's better off with one. And then Admiral Kirksey, Charles Kirksey, stood up and he said, what makes you think you're qualified to sail Niagara? There was a sort of hush in the room that people thought he said something rude. And I said, oh, thank you. This is the first time anybody asked me a question all day I know the answer to. And so I described, sailing Ellissa and the Eagle captains, et cetera, et cetera. he didn't ask any more questions. I don't know if he was satisfied or he just didn't say anything else after that. And, that was the interview. And then after when I was going to the airport to fly home, Jack Leo said, "The job's yours if you want it." I said, "Well, I'll have to think about it a couple of days." And I did, but it only took a couple of days. And I said, this is interesting. I've never sailed anything quite like this. It's going to be different." And yeah, well, it sure was. That was an understatement. But I told him I'd do it. And so that was how I got contracted to sign as sales master that first season, 91. And I made a long-range plan. It was just get the ship to Put-in Bay and back, and one visit to Cleveland as well. And then and we had no real idea of what she could do or how well she'd sail or not. And actually, when I got here, I had other work to do. I had to finish up some jobs as a consultant for National Park Service. We had some survey work we had done on their ships. And I had some projects to do before I got up here. And so I got up here, and it was like May 28th already, after Memorial Day. And I'm the first employee, and so finding a crew is going to be a problem. And a qualified crew. Fortunately, the Maritime National Trust was having a meeting in Baltimore, a full conference, and so I was down there to see if anybody was on the beach, and there's Dan Moreland. He just was let go with a whole crew from the Ernestina. Had a financial implosion. Everybody was on the beach, and that really got me off to a tremendous head start because Arthur Kimberly, who many of you may have met and sailed with over the years, Kimberly had retired from sailing Romance. He sold her best lead circumnavigated 5 circumnavigations with. And he was living ashore in Detroit, and he agreed to come as third mate. Dan Moreland became his chief mate. John Beebe Senator Moreland knew from sailing on the coast. He's a good guy for second mate. And then Arthur Kimberly, who started foremost Barques in the 30s. He was third mate. And another couple of ABs from Ernestina and Brian Donnelly was bosun. And so that was the saltiest gang you can imagine. And I don't know if I would have been able to jumpstart this project. We probably would have been able to do a day sail or two out of Erie, maybe towed to Put-in Bay and back. But I don't know if we would have really gotten the boat sailing in about 6 weeks, which is what we did from getting here. And then started, the yard lower, the tops of the yards been cock built, the gallant masts, the yards were down on deck, and all the running rigging, and all the labels had come off, and we had to sort that out. And then we had to do this, besides all the work of putting the ship together, then we had to train the crew. And so we had these drills in the dock, just setting and furling, bracing around, learning the commands. And that was very similar to what we'd done at Ellissa for the years. And it worked.
Hey, Walter, I just to interrupt you there. We did tell you before we started that we did have a surprise guest for you.
Oh.
And I think this is a good time to bring that person in. So I have him joining now. So we'll give him a second to join here. I'd like to welcome Captain Dan Moreland of the Barque Picton Castle to join us with Captain Walter Rybka, and hopefully he has some good insights about those first years with the ship. Welcome, Captain Moreland.
How you doing?
Hi, Dan. This is a great surprise.
They say we're going to
Yeah,
back here, so we better get going. I've been eavesdropping.
well,
Got a pretty good memory. Jesus. Remember all that crap? Good for you, Pay attention, write this down, because we don't remember shit pretty soon. So you got to remember. God, I look old. I'm looking at myself. Hey, congratulations. Good to chat. Let me blend in as desired and required. Thank you, Billy. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just telling them that having you on board and the rest of the Romance crew and Kimberly, I think they gave us such a head start. I don't know if we would have been able to put this thing together without that.
Well, it was pretty funny. If I was been around a consultant and Niagara and been hinted that I should apply, and I honestly wasn't the slightest bit interested in being captain of Niagara. I'd just gotten off a 19th century wooden state-owned boat, and I said, no, I'm not doing that. No, not doing that. And then Walter calls me up, and how about chief mate? And I go, hey, I need a job. Well, this is a good job. So I got a job, and it was a great, we had a ball. We had a great time. And then sitting around talking with the good captain, said, well, get some romance crew. Let's get them all. Because it's a brigantine, and there's quite a work ethic that Captain Kimberly hammered into us. If you survived, you were good at stuff. And then Brian Donnelly said, well, why don't we get we call each other Marineros. It's a Spanish name. And Brian Donnelly said, well, let's get the Grand Marinero. I said, well, that's an idea. And so we got Captain Kimberly to come, and he was a ton of fun to have. He's, of course, if I can tell a sea story here. So Brian and I, we're telling everybody what a tough guy this is. He chews nails for breakfast. He breathes fire. And, we tried to get everybody as nervous as we could, which I didn't think was going to be hard. So he shows up, and he's a pussycat. He's nice as can be. So this went on for a few days, and Brian and I took him and said, Skipper, you're letting us down here. This is kind of pretty pathetic. Yeah, but I'm not captain anymore. Okay, fine. Anyway, he was a grand addition. I think he was really quite a powerful asset to the crew, not just for what he did, but sort of how he did it. And Walter once mentioned, well, he's like a square guru. And I thought about that in a minute. I said, no, he's not. He's a square rig monk. Because he won't lecture, or he won't say, you just follow him around and do what he does, and you'll be okay, because that's the last real deal right there. And crew would do that. You tell him to go do something, he'd start wandering off. He wouldn't take anybody, give any direction, but just follow him, do what he says. Just ask him. Huge asset. But that was some pretty wild times, particularly that first summer. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, I said that Kimberly couldn't walk from one end of the ship to the other without doing something useful along the way.
That's true. Yeah.
But,
That was one of the things I admired very much. We had a lot of fun. It was a couple of years there, and one of the things was that, and it was neat to sail with Walter as my boss. I'd sail on Ellissa the other way around. That was good too. We had a good time on Ellissa. Walter was an excellent boss, still is. And this I will tell to anybody, is that, the fact is, and you guys know this, Niagara is an outrageous idea. She just is. I mean, she's a skateboard with a rig. She's a sandbagger, she's all these things that, all these sailing ships survive because they have these intrinsic qualities that allow them to survive, whether it's Ellissa or an Estina, Picton Castle, you name it. Not Niagara. They sunk her as soon as they could. She had no intrinsic value except this flag. This flag, that's the best marketing thing on earth. Yeah, there you go. Billy's got it. Yeah, that you can't beat that. So she doesn't have these intrinsic values that every other single restored ship has, except she's super cool. She's an amazing platform. And one of the great gifts that you are all the beneficiaries of is Walter's apparently measured ability to make this incredibly outrageous idea seem like it makes sense to people with the ability to write great big checks and then to make it come true. And what you're doing is amazing with Niagara. But I honestly think that if it wasn't for Walter there, that she'd be on her third rebuild. It'd be scandal left and right, and she'd be pulled up on the beach again, or undergo, something that the previous century had, indicated. But no, you've got the finest going concern of a marine educational platform in North America by far, and that's very, very cool. That's what I think.
Thank you, Dad.
And you've got some great successors and building on it, and it's it is actually without parallel. So, and that.
Dan, I'm going to jump in here for a minute. Yeah. Now, I want to ask a couple questions about when you guys first started sailing together. Now, didn't you guys sail as deckhands together?
Yes.
Yes.
On the Maverick, 76-foot Brixton trawler and out of St. Thomas.
1972.
Yep.
We both signed on a few days apart. He had this, it was a wonderful program because he'd have this incredibly unqualified deckhand and the next to most unqualified deckhand. I was the most unqualified, and Walter was the next to most unqualified. But he called us second mate and first mate. So we're walking around town, you know, I'm second mate. Well, I couldn't spell mate. I don't know what it meant. But we were deckhands, but it was the way it was structured. It gave us responsibility. He was a hell of a sailor, and he was good with people. And I learned a lot in that time on Maverick. But he got responsibility right away, which was kind of, you know, when we had their little watches of it, the passengers. It was a neat starting ship for me. But we signed on in the fall of 1972. And why don't you take it from there, Walt? Then we got dismasted. That was interesting.
Yeah, I remember we showed up on the same day.
I think the same, okay, same day.
And then, yeah, we got dismasted and then had to re-rig the ship in a couple of weeks. And that was pretty interesting.
Hell of a start.
Yeah.
I get people ask me, so how'd you learn rigging? Well, I was on 2 ships that was dismasted. That was and the guy, you know, the skippers know what they're doing, but that's a pretty good start. You know, dismast your ship, you'll learn rigging.
Yes, it was rotten, Jack said. Well, I knew it was rotten. I didn't think it was that rotten.
The thing is, I'm 18 years old and I'm looking at this thing. It's a big, heavy gaff rig, bricks and charlotte, and you can see the masthead when you're on one tack.
Yeah.
And you tack, masts actually don't kink like this. They kind of bend around, but this one would, this is straight and that would do that. I'm exaggerating a little bit. Then it would do that. And I go up and there's this chafe gear and you can push, you know. This is, and I'm just, what do I, and I worked in boatyards, but this seems very bad. Turns out it was.
Yep.
Don't take economy too far.
One of the funny things from that first summer on Niagara was the first scheduled day sail. The tug didn't show up. And this was a day that we were not going to go sailing anyway. But a cold front had come through, and the next morning was blowing pretty stiff and cool for August. And it was going to be a beautiful day. But the wind kept piping up, piping up, piping up. Finally, it's blowing about 30, and there's 3-foot little breaking white caps in the bay, and outside it's much bigger. And so here we are. I'm thinking, well, this is a no-brainer about not going out. I mean, I never sailed with a professional crew on this ship before. It's on a Dan. I know the other guys, and it seemed like they're going to be just fine, but I didn't know that. And the volunteer crew has been trained to dock, and I don't know what they know. And then we're going to be on a lee shore. We don't have an engine. We're going to be working with a tug we haven't seen yet. And so I had decided a long time that 7 ways from Sunday, there was no way we were going out. But in the meantime, all the yachtsmen are part of the guests of the league. They're like kicking up the grass and saying, "Boy, Captain, you must be really angry at that tug skipper. He's depriving you of a wonderful sailing day." I thought, oh boy, thank God he's not here, because all the shit is getting dumped on his head for not showing up, because he ducked into Fairport to lay up in shelter. I said, you know, if he had showed up, then it all would have been in my head as being a fraud and a poltroon, et cetera, for not taking the ship out. There's no way we were going out that day.
Ended up calling it the tug defector.
And tug was named the Protector, crew called it the Defector.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny stories about that tug. Was that the same one we did the next summer? Or was that a different one?
No, 91, 91 was the only summer we had that tug. Then we got over the
yeah, that's the one you tug around. Right. But that's half the book is that tugboat guy. You go on. You tell you they're good. They're rich.
Well, I was like, you know, he'd go out and he'd tow us out and get us around the peninsula, and then he'd drop off and he'd hang out in the lee of the peninsula while we sailed the ship back and forth for a while. And at the end of the day, he'd come along close in, so we could get in line to him and pass the messenger and tow us back in. This is an 86-foot tug, and Niagara's just, it's easy to break off stuff all over her. So we never got to let him alongside. We didn't take him on the hip, couldn't do that. We had him tow ahead and then had him just feather into the wind and slow down until we could drop the line down and drop back until we could fix our berth. which was the next pier over. Our berth wasn't dug yet. But, and so we did that for, well, 6 day sails, I think, Saturdays and Sundays. We did this when crew were off and could do it. And then it was time to go to Put-in Bay. And going down to Put-in Bay, I had said, we're going to stay underway and sail when we can, and we'll motor when we need to, we'll take a tow when we need it, and just stay in hailing distance, a couple miles, and that's that. We got 3 days to get there. And this is kind of foolish on my part not to make this a little more of a discussion because, but you know, it never occurred to me that a tug couldn't take a ship down the length of the lake, couldn't stay underway at night. Now, of course, he had only taught us on day sails, so it didn't occur to him that we'd want to stay underway at night. And so that first day out, we sailed a little bit, and then it's time to start getting there, and it's going to be blowing out of the west all night and raining. So we froze everything, take the tow line, and start pulling towards Put-in Bay. And then about 9 o'clock at night, he all of a sudden shears off about 45 degrees to port. And I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, I'm going to go to Cleveland for the night." I said, "We're not going to Cleveland." And he says, "Well, yeah, I really want to go tie up there." And I said, well, I don't know what dock we're going to be. I've never been alongside there. This is no time to try and fish around for a dock. And he said, "Well, how about anchoring?" Well, we never anchored Niagara. Our anchors have been put on board with a forklift and left there ever since. And I was figuring on doing that in a daylight operation the first time. And then finally, so we're arguing back and forth. And then finally he says, "Well, you know, I don't have enough licenses to stay away at night." So I said, "Why didn't you tell me before you left?" He said, "Well, I didn't think you'd want to go at night." And I realized that, boy, here's this big a miscommunication. But we had some eager beavers in the crew, and Eric Speth was with us that trip, and Craig Chipman was one of our crew this summer. He was not a romance marinero. He was produced from the West Coast. And so both these guys have tickets, and they volunteered to steer the tug through the night if you'd let them. John Beebe Center runs them over in that little ridiculous duck boat we have, and death-defying stunt, and gets them on board. And I told Eric, "All right, I want you to shape up on course for Put-in Bay as like 255 or something." And he says, "All right." And then he starts swinging. All of a sudden, he's swinging all the way off to the north. I said, "Where are you going?" "You're steering about 360 or 350 or something." And he says, "Well, that's 255 is what you said." "Yeah, well, that's what the needle says." I said, "Well, the hell it is, yeah." "Give me a captain." So the tug captain gets back on the radio, and I said, "Do you realize your compass is 60 degrees off?" And he said, "Oh, no, I thought it was off. I knew it was off. I didn't think it was off by that much." So I said, "Well, can I ask you a question? How do you navigate going up and down the lake anyway?" He says, "Well, I just set the radar range ring for 3 miles and follow the coast." And but I mean, and the compass we had in Niagara at that time was a very authentic dry card compass that Melbourne had built for her. And the card fell off the pivot pin the first time we slammed into waves and had a little vibration through the hull. So we have no compass on Niagara. We got one that's 60 degrees out in the tug. But we had radar and we had Loran. So by applying the Loran position about at 3-minute intervals, and then using the radar in and out to long range and close range, we keep track of the distance offshore. And so that's how we conned the tug from the Niagara through the night. That was kind of an interesting thing to have to do.
Very interesting, but Eric Speth and Craig were very capable guys.
Yep.
And I think Craig had tugboat time too, and they've been managing things very well.
Yep.
But that was goofy. Yeah, that was pretty goofy.
And then the next morning, we're off Marblehead and decided to cast off and sail for a few hours. And a tugboat, not tugboat, a Coast Guard launch comes roaring up, a 40-footer comes up, and it says, "Call your office." And I said, "All right, well, could you please call them for us?" And they were a little reluctant, but we had no way of calling besides trying to marine operators. I don't think they had in the Great Lakes. And we had a cell phone on board, but in those days there were no cell phone towers down by Put-in Bay, so the thing wasn't going to work at all. And but so I said, look, just can you please just call our office and tell them we're okay, that we're just fine, because they came up and that was their first question, you guys okay? And they thought we were in distress somehow. And what happened was that Bill Welch, one of our volunteer crew, also worked 3 times, and he goes down to the beach that night that we had towed out, and we're leaving and towing overnight. And he tries calling the Niagara. He hails her. Well, standing at the beach, his range of line of sight VHF antenna is about 10 miles max. So he doesn't know that. By that time, we're 30, 40 miles down the lake, so he doesn't get an answer. So he goes back and writes a little story about losing contact. And then the next morning, the headline in the Erie paper in 2-inch block letters is "Contact Lost with Brig Niagara." And so that was a little embarrassing, but we knew just where we were, and we were fine. And we sailed around that day a bit, did some maneuvering, and then went into the anchorage and put in bay. And since we weren't due in for a couple more days, and anchored. And I remember that capstan blew apart the first time we tried picking up the anchor. It was well dug in. We came trying to break it out. The capstan just started exploding and falling apart. We had to bolt 2 pieces of plywood through it with through rods and patch it up to get home and get the anchor out the bottom. And that was an improv, but I did a day sail there and had some nice visitation. Actually made a good trip out of it.
It was a hell of a trip. Things falling apart, it was shakedown. You know, yes, things might look authentic, but they aren't always authentic just because they look authentic. So the capstan looked like a good capstan, but when you used it, it might not be a good capstan. Same with the compass, but we had the nasty Dracula rope.
Yeah.
That was something. They had a lot of peculiarities, but you've worked the kinks out of them in pretty short order, and I don't know, she's a great ship.
Yeah. Dracula rope is what Dan calls polypro. It explodes and is exposed to sunlight.
Well, this was the cheapest sort of light brown rope, and instead of buying Roblon or some other, synthetic that looks brown. This was like, I don't know what this was, but it was made out of old brown garbage bags, and it literally, if you exposed it to light, it would die and shrivel up in your hands, and the stuff wasn't even very old.
Oh no, Melbourne gives us a hard time about not tarring rig adequately. He uses junk for foot ropes. That was the first thing we did, was swap out the foot ropes. Real ones.
That stuff, it was, yeah, I mean, yeah, Melbourne.
Later, back here, gentlemen, I was wondering if you could speak to how Niagara sailed during that time period in terms of 1991.
Well, I think the hull was pretty authentic to the original shape because it had the same miserable performance. The original ship was recorded in its logbook as sailing with 18 degrees of leeway. And that's precisely what we did. Falling by, best we could do with it would be about 18 degrees of leeway, or make it only about 80 something off the wind, maybe 10 degrees on a board. And she just skated to leeward like a dish. She heel over until her bilge was in, her keel was starting to lift and get shadowed by it, and then she'd slide to leeward. And and the next year when we got the ballast keel on her and the engine room put the machinery in, we had all this lead that we couldn't afford to sail without it. We couldn't afford to sail with any higher ups, so we bolted it to the bottom. That keel did more for her performance than anything else. It really cut her leeway down tremendously. Now we have 30 inches outside the garboard instead of 11.
Made a big difference.
Yeah.
I also think there's both of us are square rig. My square rig background is large steel ships, and with the exception of Romance, which is a small brig, Danish brig, which was designed and built by Alan Villiers, but it was sort of representing a mid-19th century thing. And then Captain Art Kimberley, who was a true age of sail sailor, and we had to get this thing to windward in Sir Francis Drake Channel. And to do that, you just haul those lee braces right in, and you bend those backstays. You just, none of this, don't worry about scraping the paint off the yard. No, just those backstays are swifted right in. But since then, you know, the Denmark and Moreland and other ships, you didn't do that. You bring the yard into the backstays and stop. And Ellissa, we were careful not to do that too much because it ruins the varnish and so forth. And then so we're sailing along in the Niagara first couple of days, and we're doing the same thing we're used to doing, and we're just losing ground badly. She tack fine, but every tack lost ground. So okay, we got to fix this. But with the trusses, I'm talking to the choir. You guys know all this. Is you let go of your trusses and you just haul those leaks, particularly the topsail and lower braces, hard around, and she points right up.
Yeah.
And, a couple points. Now we're still losing a lot of leeway, but by sort of letting go of the more 20th century sailing or late 19, get into the sticks and string rig, where that lee backstay is not doing anything. We just warp it in. Don't worry about it. The weather one's doing the job. Just that floppy lee backstay, just brace it right in.
Yep.
That's the difference. Putting the keel allowed you to keep that difference. So I think she sailed pretty well. You guys sailed
when I first got on the ship back in 2005, we were bracing up one of the first times, and the second mate at the time was Jed Deering, and he told me, he's like, yeah, you can brace it up, I would say wicked sharp, and he'd go until we put the main yard right up against the mainstay, so the tie is just stretched out and it's hard up against the mainstay, and he's like, yeah, that's about right, and the gallant backstays are just completely pushed all the way in. The topmast backstays are all pushed in, and it was pretty shocking when I first got there. I was like, you can do this, in the topsail yard, what it does to the the shrouds, the topmast shrouds. I mean, they're completely pushed in. It's rather impressive.
They're jammed right in there, and also you can haul up the lee lower yard lift, which brings down the weather yard arm, which lets you go further on the forestay or the So yeah, but but that sticks, and that's the Pride of Baltimore was like that. The old one is there were some you look at these older rigs and you go, they're antiquated, but they got some advantages. They do some nifty things because they're sticks and string that you cannot do with a hard iron rig like Ellissa or Picton Castle. They don't move a lot. We jam, but the backstays don't move a lot. So yeah, there's some neat things you can do with sticks and string, and you've got, of course, the vessel to do it with.
I remember the demonstration of that the last day sail that year. We had towed back from Cleveland and we had a downwind sail, and then that night we finished up under tow and anchored in the harbor. So the next day we could take people out for a sail. They came out on the tug, and it took a long time to get them transferred out using the tug. And then the tug picked us up and towed us out. And I foolishly got a little impatient because it was taking so long. And this is our last day of the year, and it was absolutely flat calm. So we were just going to set some things for demonstration. They'd hang in their gear. In fact, we got the sweeps out, moved by the child buoy, 1 mile out from the jetties where the buoy is. That's the channel. And I got just out there, dropped the tug, and I shouldn't have done that. I really learned from that. I learned a lesson about the Great Lakes, how fast weather changes, because we actually got the sweeps out for demonstration. We're sweeping along a little bit. And then about 15 minutes later, after morning of just absolute flat calm on glass, this northerly breeze comes out of the northwest, and it's all of a sudden blowing like 15 knots, just on and off. It's on a switch, didn't build garage or anything, just boom, there it is. And the ship just takes off, like all of a sudden she's doing 8 knots. And so we got to run the sweeps in, and so we get that done. So now we're braced up, we're making about 8 knots, and if we tack, we're not going to weather the peninsula at all. And if we don't tack, there's this fleet of little fishing boats, little yachts, and charter boats, outboard skiffs. There's this whole bunch of motorboats out there, maybe 30, 40 of them, and they're anchored. Or some of them are anchored, most of them are anchored. And it's hard to tell which until you get closer. And if we went to leeward, we might be jammed on the shore, and we couldn't weather them. So I decided we had to go through them. So I started conning from the main shrouds, and Dan, I remember putting you on the tiller, and just with hand signals, like a little up, a little down, we just threaded our way through these little boats and actually made some ground to windward. We didn't lose any, and managed to get out and back. And I remember some of them, I was just scared the piss out of them when we and they're looking down, they're sitting there, and all of a sudden I look up, and the Niagara Shade is by about 2 feet off them. And that was kind of an exciting way to finish up.
Yeah, pretty exciting. Yeah, terrifying. Yeah, it's all about you know, they talk about, what is it, safety management system. Sailing Niagara is terror management. It's managing your terror, and you've done a good job at that, Walter. Keep it up. You guys too. It's about managing terror. Ugh.
Got it, manage it.
When Walter used to do this every beginning of every season, he'd bring all the mates into his office, and it was usually right before shakedown, and he would do his best to scare all of us.
Good.
And he would, you know, show like, all right, this is how much Niagara draws, and this is the rig, and this is how big the rig is. Now, this is another ship that draws much more than us, that has way more freeboard, and her rig is, you know, 3/4 of that. And then you have this, and he's like doing all these different things. And by the end of it, you know, he's pretty much saying that Niagara is pretty much a windsurfer, you know, comparatively, like you were saying earlier, Dan, about, you know, being kind of a sandbagger, and, you know, it's just, there isn't a lot below the water, and there's a lot above the water. And yeah, so he would successfully scare all of us and then say, okay, let's go sailing. So it was an interesting time, especially my first season on the ship.
Yeah, you got to put the fear of God in you. You know,
Oh, yeah.
Good idea. Good to do.
But a couple of things I wanted to, so we got some comments here that have been coming in from people that have sailed with you, Walter. Rebecca Grimaldi says hello. Robert Kelly, he sailed in the summer of 1998. And let's see, it's one of the best experiences of his life. Let's see, Sean Hannon from 2004. Tom Castle. Pride of Baltimore 2 says hello. Lindsay Thomas was on during Upsail in 2000. Ed Hale was hoping you would tell the story about the compass being so off on the tug, and we didn't actually ask you that, but you told the story anyway. And then Dennis Bova, he liked the story about the contact loss with Brig Niagara story, and that's Ian Bova's father. So just wanted to get those comments in for you.
Nice to hear from you guys. Thanks for your thoughts.
Well, for me, it was just what I needed personally. First of all, I needed a job, and it was great to do square rig. It was great to work with my friend and shipmate Walter. It's great to not be the boss. It was great to be chief mate for the creative process that really is, and particularly working hand in glove with Walter. And so I liked everything about it. And then, of course, we did the most Walter and Dan's excellent adventure going down the Erie Canal on this thing. That was something, and that's nuts, by the way, crazy. If someone thinks that's a good idea, it's not. I'm glad we did it. And then we got to Philadelphia, and you know, the rig came in a box, and here's a scow with bowsprit had to come out. Bowsprit was too high, and that was a very proud period. And we really probably smoked a few people because this is because we rigged the ship from keel up and under sail under gallants in 2 weeks. That was a pretty good thing to do, I thought. But the guys at Gazella thought we were snobs because we wouldn't hang out with them at night at the bar. Well, we were rigging at night. We weren't doing that. And I remember them, well, we're rigging up too, they said. You bent a main staysail today. We put in lower mess and top mess. That's different, you know. And it was a very, you know, I mean, who cares about these things? Well, guys like us care about them. But it was a neat thing to have the confidence we could do it. Walter has to sell this idea. It's not really a sound idea, but we thought we could do it. We were sure we could do it, and then the better yet, it got done. And there was a lot of sort of synergy in managing that, and that was a neat thing. A funny thing I did, of course, for me was, you know, I come on board, we don't have any time, we got to get things going, blah, 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 you know, so I mean, okay, I looked through the thing, there weren't any shackles anywhere. So we get, you know, 12 3/4, 12 1/2 inch, you know, get a bunch of shackles. Of course, we never used them. She doesn't have any shackles. She doesn't need shackles, right? So, but God damn it, we're going to have shackles. So we got a bunch of, you know, your standard order of shackles. and housing wire. Well, what, of course, then, well, mate, what do you want these shackles for? Well, yeah, I don't know, but I thought we needed them. Turns out we don't need shackles. Seizings, yes. We had a bunch of Ellissa friends, more friends. I've been down there some and as mate and captain. But we got a bunch of Ellissa crew up, and when they got over hating us, they were very proud of their experience. But it was a hard burn. I mean, it was a push.
Yeah.
The ones that didn't hate us forever had a great time.
I have a question for both of you guys. You know, that both of you were sailing in Ellissa, both of you sailed in Niagara, you know, and how do you feel that those two ships kind of changed or shaped or didn't shape the sort of traditional sailing world, primarily in this country, not so much, you know, up in Canada or in Europe, but how did those two ships and their programs change how traditional sail was done over the course of the past 30 years?
Walter, you start.
Well,
I'll add to that, you know, they're actually square riggers. You know, there are schooners around. There's plenty of schooners now, but these are two square riggers that are sailing in the United States.
Oh, they're reasonable vessels to talk about together.
yeah. The Ellissa is she's a beautiful ship, and she's a sea kindly ship. And I think if you're seaman enough to give her half a chance, she will bring you home. The Niagara is not quite like that. She's a little more feisty. But I think the Ellissa kind of demonstrated what can be done in a way. You know, the type of words, any projects like that around. So I think it's had some long-term effect if people want to emulate that. And the Niagara has been it's just been a gift to have this brig dumped in my lap and said, let's figure out how to use it. And in a sense, it was, Ellissa has always been an absolute shoestring because they're trying to run it off gate as much as they can and do as little fundraising as possible for it. The Niagara was, for a long time, many years, was run not under a gusher of money, but on a budget that was reasonable. They could pay for what we needed, and maybe a couple extras, but yeah, the ship was genuinely well found. Recent years, last 10 years or so, she's really had to earn her way. That's made it much more difficult. And but it's we managed, I think it was God's own mercy that we got the Niagara sailing for 7 years before the museum opened. We were able to establish a program with the ship as the ship. And work on a sail training program, volunteers signing on for 3 weeks at a time at least. And that helps her get a reputation built instead of having to fight and argue to get her away from the dock.
My answer to that question, which is what do these two ships, what sort of impact do they had on traditional square rig sailing in the States? Is that your question, Billy? Is that fair? Can you repeat your question exactly?
Yeah, it's kind of the idea that did Ellissa and Niagara kind of pave the way for other programs to start, and more sail training vessels being, whether they were being built or rebuilt or things like that. Did Ellissa and Niagara have a big part in what was going on 80s and 90s, and then up to today now with granted there are a lot of ships that aren't sailing right now, but so what did they have? What effect did they have on the world of traditional sail in the United States?
Here's my thinking on that. I think Ellissa, there's a lot of difference between the ships. Walter's right. Ellissa's a sweet ship. She's like, she's sea kindly. You could easily imagine sort of finishing her off as a seagoing thing and just bang zoom, just do what we did with Picton Castle. They're not much different in size, so she'd be fine for that. She's bigger than I'd want, but she's not that much bigger than I'd want for what we do. So, but she really, I think her greater impact is probably more in the museum world. It says, geez, maybe it's good to sail these things a little bit and it's not so hard to do it. It's not impossible. So I think she's had a very significant, she's moved the needle in museum ships. Probably Morgan wouldn't have sailed without that. James Craig looks to the Ellissa, but I don't think it moves. She's such an anomaly. I don't think it's moved the needle a lot among like the American sailing crowd. And while we would get called in to sail her, and you know, you always get something out of it, she really isn't a training ship for the young professional American mariners. They want to get on her. It's a good feather in your hat, but it's not really a going concern. Now, conversely, Niagara is a much bigger impact on sort of the working force of, you know, for young American mariners. It's, you know, a huge impact by, and, you know, she's taken that, the Ellissa, the museum ship that can sail, but now she's sailed and campaigned, as you guys know. But, you know, crew go on there for a season, they get something out of it. I mean, they get solid stuff. And if I can, you know, send my American Picton Castle crew, you know, you've sailed around the world for a year, whatever, go there and you'll learn something. You know, you'll pick things up. First, shut up about Picton Castle. No one wants to hear you yammering away about that. And you will get good things from Niagara, very good things. It will add to your quiver of arrows far more than you'll contribute. And I have no trouble saying that. So I think Niagara's been very impactful on the traditional sailing ship scene and the crewing thereof. Ellissa, much less so. But she's been very impactful, I think, in sort of the museum ship world and the more internationally. You know, she's, you know, James Craig looks up to Ellissa a lot. I don't know about Star of India, but what happens, and this is not to be, this is going to sound a little more negative than I intended, but the people doing what they're doing on Ellissa and Star of India and James Craig, you know, this isn't their job. They're volunteers, they're coming down on weekends, and this is what they want to do. And they don't really want to get a job on Victory Chimes or Niagara. This is it. They've got their volunteer program, they got their camaraderie, they got their coffee cup and their Ellissa underwear, and monogram, and that's it. They're having a ball. They're loving it. And there's no reason they shouldn't love it. But it doesn't really go a lot beyond Ellissa. And whereas Niagara does. Niagara has, you know, someone that's going in Niagara has a couple seasons, they'll go somewhere else unless they stick around and go away and come back. But I think that's very much an ethos that Walter and you guys have developed and encouraged. You know, learn all you can here, go away, come back, learn more. Because there's all kinds of layers to this onion. And that's similar to Picton Castle. When people get off after a long voyage and they want to stay crew, no, leave, go for a year, come back, work on any other ship, and then come back. You need some perspective, you know, because we're proud of what we do. No shame in it at all. But you need perspective if you're going to advance here. Otherwise, you get into sort of just doing it the same old way, and you're not really contributing. You're not, yeah, you might be learning. You're getting practice for sure. You know, if the 100 times, 10,000 times you've done something. But that ethos is something that Niagara has that Ellissa does not have. And that's there's a big gap between those two things. So I'd say Niagara has a big impact. Ellissa, and the sweetest ship you ever want. I mean, dynamite ship, cool ship. I mean, and nicely done. But no, not a big impact in our collective world. Not that you don't want to go down and be mate for a crew and get your ticket snapped and that kind of thing and get something out of it. Sure. If you're a qualified mariner and you go on for a couple of weeks, yeah, you get something out of it. But it doesn't make or create you. Niagara does. Niagara will make you. You know, you spend a few summers on Niagara, that's something. That's not just a merit badge. That's the whole sash. So.
Oh, thank you.
Now, Walter, I wanted to ask if you could speak to those early years on Niagara and kind of figuring out the ship, you know, as you get through the first couple of years, but as you go through the 90s, you know, some of the things that you learned about Niagara and sailing her.
Well, I learned, frankly, never take your eyes off her. That's true. Maybe any ship is especially true in Niagara. And I also learned that she's pretty maneuverable with her twin screw arrangement, even though they're close together. Just pretty good handling ship around dock, and we had a touch of landing on some pretty windy occasions. but also decided that Niagara is just, she has her limits which have to be respected, which means if you're really going to expect it to hit the fan, you want to be tied up somewhere 7 ways from Sunday. And I think when Niagara, Dan pointed this out to me in the first voyage in '92 when we were on the East Coast. He said, the thing about the ship is she's either very fast or she stops. Not much in between. And I don't know if you remember that, Dan, but that was, I think, a really good insight into her.
Where were we?
Oh, we were going down Delaware Bay against wind and tide, and just having this like 4 or 5 foot chop in Delaware Bay and making 3 knots over the bottom. And he said, she's either very fast or she's stopped.
That's Niagara.
Yeah.
I think another thing that's worth noting, and I referenced it earlier, I mean, all these, ships that were restored had some intrinsic quality that resulted in them lasting a long time. Whether it was Ellissa, always had a craft, had a trade. They had something that carried them along. And Ellissa didn't, Niagara didn't have this. She fought to win or lose a battle and they sunk her and that was it. The other thing is that is typical of the museum ships is they're usually small examples of their class, and including some of the restored ones that are in operation. They're small examples of their class. Niagara's, again, the opposite of that. She's a huge brig. She's not a little brig. She's the biggest brig as you can make, really. That makes no sense at all. She's a massive example of her class of rig. They didn't make, and then on a very little hull. I think another fact, and I think you do it in the museum, one of the fascinating things about her is how she sort of shows the, the beginning, it shows the roots of the military industrial procurement thing 200 plus years, whenever it was, 200 years ago, because it has all the same earmarks of what they've been doing ever since World War II. And that was fascinating. Walter speaks eloquently on that. And sort of even her design function was very cool. I mean, the British sent their Mark II brig design up to lake somewhere, and they built a brig, and they had lots of room for storing fresh water for ocean voyages, and Niagara had no room at all. Well, you don't need to store fresh water. You throw a bucket over the side. But that sort of represents new thinking. So that's interesting. I think that, to me, that's an interesting thing. I'm sort of off your question, but she's a very radically different ship that requires, but I wonder also if the fact that she is so extreme, it makes people be cautious in ways that if she was a little more forgiving, you wouldn't.
Yep.
And I think that's actually a plus. They say, well, this ship's kind of special. Let's just take it easy. And as long as any nut bar doesn't think, well, let's take her to England. And no, don't go to England. No, bad idea. No, terrible idea. That was one of our discussions years ago, is that we have to get this sort of ethos in place at some, we get all fired or thrown off or quit. And then the next guy with, some John Paul Jones thing, let's sail to England. We sail to Philadelphia. We can go to England. Bad idea. So remember that, Walter?
Yeah.
Just because make a big brass plaque on the main beam. Don't do this. Yet what she does amazingly well. And no other ship does it as consistently as well. I mean, in Picton Castle, yeah, we do something pretty cool, but we tack. I mean, I've done a whole voyage without tacking. Oh shit, we haven't tacked. Well, let's tack, So we remind ourselves to tack. I mean, you tack more than a week than we do in 5 years that we have to. That's neat. That's good. So it's I'll tell a little Walter joke. Is that all right?
Yeah.
And so we're off Put-in Bay somewhere, and God, we've done every damn maneuver you could think of. We box hauled, we tacked, we wore ship, we did things I didn't know the name of. And it was getting late in the day. We had a west wind. We're heading for Erie. Someday we're supposed to be there tomorrow, I think. And Walter says to me, hey, Dan, what maneuver should we do that we haven't done? How about we steer straight for a night? Just see what that's like. It's kind of like, maybe it's cool. We haven't done it, And, Walter knew what I was saying. So, yeah, okay. He said, if we tack one more time, I'm going to slit your throat, So we sailed west. Fantastic. Yards were squared. Nice 4-3 breeze. Beautiful night. But all that together is that's an amazing experience for people. you know, and it's amazing for us who got to shape it, design it, lead it, and you guys get to do the same thing, grow it and interpret it and find new nuances, because there's lots of nuances. And that's people that are there for a week get a neat experience, but those of us who are there a longer time, that's pretty cool. And I think embracing that's important, because no, she can't do everything, but what she can do, no one else can do. That's cool. So that's neat.
Very cool, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Before we break, I would like to see if Joe has a question that he'd like to ask both of you. Anything, Joe?
Yeah, I'll pop up here just to get a word in edgewise, but it's really been a pleasure listening and being a passive participant in this, and just letting Captain Rybka and Captain Moreland talk. If I got to pick one question from my list, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the Erie Canal voyage, which seems like seems like bumper bowling from everything I've heard, and maybe if there were some highlights from that, that'd be cool to hear about.
Over to you, Captain Rybka.
Well, the Erie Canal, yeah, Niagara's about, actually, she's not quite the largest vessel that's ever been through the canal. Bounty had to chainsaw off some of her taffrail to get through, but and she ran aground more often. But Niagara is a vessel that, as we went through, we found that she would pull bank suction if you stay absolutely dead center the whole way, and we just couldn't make more than 4.5 knots in the whole halfway across, starting at the western end. It wasn't until we got past Lake Oneida that you were in a river system that was canalized and had locks that were easy to get through. But you know, we made an adaptation for it. We made a platform and an extension for the tiller so the helmsman could see where he was going, and a little radar mast. And she was a pretty good motorboat for that. But I remember thinking as we went through that this would be a lot of fun someday to do this again, but in something about a fraction of the size, like the old 40 or 50 foot boat. Let's do that. But, I remember that trip through the canal. Dan and I had to be on the bridge, or standing balanced on the taffrail because we didn't have the bridge then. Just the entire trip, every minute, to keep from pulling into a bank. Do you remember that, Dan?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm glad I did it, but what was it? Oprah Winfrey or one of those said, or Maya Angelou says, yeah, I wouldn't, you can't, I don't want to do it again, but you can't take it away from me. It was, I mean, like Walter said, you know, nice 45-foot twin screw Chris Craft drawing, you know, not too much. Tie up at night, beer cooler, that'd be great. But Niagara, not that was, I don't want to do that. No, that was crazy. But we did a lot of crazy stuff and made it look good. But that's that guy, he did that. But yeah, that was a tight fit. That was definitely 6 pounds of poop in a 5-pound bag. Yeah, but it worked. And you know, the bridge, it's not just the draft, of course, it's the bridges. You got to get under the bridges.
We came around this one bend on, I think it was the first or second day, and it was a railroad bridge there, and there were a bunch of kids jumping off it and swimming and playing, and you put her hard astern as you needed to get her stopped, and I came running up from below, and you said, well, sorry to head it over you like this, Cap, but you know, there it was, and it took us about an hour to get some lines out that we could pull against and run lines with our little skiff and get a position, because we had the engine, but we didn't have the cutter one then. And the engines were new and maybe 20 hours on them by that time. And hadn't figured out all the nuances of handling her that way. But we're taking a while to get out of there.
Yeah, we did a little bumping from time to time. It was shallow and low.
Yeah.
Not strongly recommended, and we might have reported to the Coast Guard more often than we did about the bumping, but it's a long time ago. It doesn't matter anymore. Yeah, it's all good, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. I think we're kind of getting close to towards the end here. I kind of wanted to ask you gentlemen what your thoughts on, traditional sail and where everything is headed for ships like that in, the United States, in the world. Obviously, right now is a difficult time, but as we start getting through this pandemic, what do you think is on the other side?
Well, I don't know. I hope it's something better, because for several years there have been fewer and fewer ships doing voyaging. The vast majority of the American fleet is a day sailing fleet. Number of vessels that really do passages coastwise, even, or just go anywhere at all away from their home waters, is a tiny, small portion of that. And so I think it's something we hope never to lose with Niagara, and something to encourage Ellissa to do more of. And maybe it's a benefit that Tall Ships Challenges can encourage more ships to get underway a little more. But there's a lot to running a ship that just doesn't happen. There's no demands for it. It just doesn't happen when you're underway for just 3 or 4 hours at a time. That's its own set of skills to be able to get out and make something happen and get it back in. But to make a passage or just have a harmonious, peaceful ship for day after day, that's something that's going to be a rare and rare experience.
I think if you're coming up the household mariner, having both, I look very favorably on a mate that has day sail time as well as deep water time, because the repetition and the ship handling is like Pioneer's awesome. The guys that they put some time in on Pioneer, that's great. Windjammer, main Windjammer is really good. The question, however, is where's this going in? And I don't really know. I know that there's some indicators that aren't very positive. For example, and I mean, some of this we can ameliorate, some of this we can fix. Like, we started bosun school in part because I'm getting all these really qualified and credentialed mates that couldn't run the outboard boat. They just couldn't do it. They just never did. Never been called upon. And that they had lots of emergency duty training. They could put out a fire. Well, can you prevent a fire? Can you splice a wire? Can you make a new we got to do this stuff. We got to do all of it. And so we do bosun school, and that's a ton of fun. We got a session going right now. The indicators that aren't good are nothing more or less to do with us, but it's like, for example, the main Windjammer fleet. I mean, a lot of them for sale, for very reasonable prices, and not getting any bites. And now, when Walter and I were younger, what would happen is the mate would, get the grandmother to co-sign the mortgage, and he would buy the Stephen Tabor, that kind of thing. And he's going to run the Stephen Tabor for a long time, but the mates aren't buying the boats anymore. I mean, you got some very nice vessels that are on the market. They're asking isn't even a bad price, and they're going to take less. So I don't see that as a very positive thing. I don't. Well, no. I mean, the American Eagle, he's asking $670,000. You couldn't build it for $5 million, and he'll take less, I'm sure, right? And yet there's a perfect schooner. I mean, ideal in so many ways, but. So those I don't know what they mean. Besides, doesn't sound like it means something good. We like to think there was this burst of interest, and there probably was, and maybe there was, but maybe it was less of a burst than we thought back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Maybe it wasn't really quite this great big bubble we thought. Maybe it was just a little blip. But this parrot, and I used to read these Alan Villiers books, and I get kind of annoyed with him because he kept saying that he was the last guy to do it and no one else was going to do it. And I kept saying, well, we're doing it, you jerk. And and then more recently, we have these niche things. We're going to keep going with Picton Castle and Niagara. I think that's true, because there's always going to be, it's not going to drop off to zero. There's always going to be enough people who want to do this, and the history and the heritage. I find I spend more time establishing context of what the ship is. People come on, they think it's cool, maybe a pirate boat, and they get to go to sea in the Arbidar, but they've never heard of the Moshulu or the Last Grain Race or the Denmark or the Romance or the Yankee, So that context that we grew up with, don't have it. So I spend more time on explaining that, informing them, and they like it when they get it, but I mean, I just did a Bosun School question. You guys any heard of, and I named them. Nope, never heard of them. But they wanted to be there. So maybe my job is to give them context. A rather dismal sort of metaphor I've used is that the guys that, you know, we sailed with watched the sunset of the age of sail. We're in the sunset, and then we're seeing the damn flash. Probably not, but because I mean, I think the ships also have historical context, particularly Niagara, that will keep it going. In other words, the sort of the institution of context will keep her going, even as it makes less sense to more people, or more sense to less people, and yet maybe that sort of achieves an equilibrium. So the big answer to your question is I have no idea, which I don't know. What we're doing, I should butt it in, we just announced today, we're announcing a world voyage. After swearing up and down I wouldn't do another one, that given everything we're doing today, we want to do it, and I'm actually excited about it. But the response has been outrageously positive. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's sustainable, but for active ships. I think today, if I was trying to go out and raise the money I needed to build a Picton Castle, I think that would be very, very difficult today, much harder than it was in 1996. So what does it indicate? I think it indicates bigger things than the ship's relevancy or not. I think it really speaks to other things. So, but I think Niagara's in good shape. You guys are doing great. You've built this sort of, you built a constituency. That's critical. You've got a large institution around it. That's important. The museum's a big thing. It's good you don't have that glass garage, because somebody someday would say, well, put her in it. You know, that was, that Walter referred to this consulting at the 1990 or 91, wherever it was, and big debate in Erie. And, you know, there was the team that wanted the glass garage, and then there was a team that wanted a sailor. And I said, well, for the price of the glass, because they wanted to preserve it, they wanted to get rotten and things like that. I said, well, if you build a glass, you could, for the price of a glass garage, you can build 3 more of these things. You can just throw them away when you're done. And they didn't really like that, but it, you know, so it probably helped the funding. I don't know what it helped, but that would sort of, yeah, guy's got a point. So what's the future? I don't know. That's going to be you guys. You guys figure it out.
Yeah, the make of it, yeah. So before we break here and take our lead, does anybody have any other questions or anything they want to say?
I think it's a pretty unique thing that all of us have sailed for Walter as mates. You know, I think it's the influence that Walter has had on all of sail training, and this not just in this country, but even in Europe and everywhere. You know, everybody knows who Walter Rybka is. Everybody knows, you know, what Niagara is, and we've all benefited from 40 plus years of him being a part of our community. And if you look at how many people have come through the ranks in Niagara and then went and did amazing other things, and Dan Moreland is one of those people. You know, now granted, obviously you guys are both doing great things beforehand, but you know, you have so many people that have come through Niagara and then gone out to the other ships, and sort of the Niagara way is really Walter's way. And I think that is so obvious and prevalent throughout our entire, you know, industry. So Walter, thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, kind of just piggybacking on that, Billy is one of the mates who, you know, I would consider Walter being a huge influence on my experience in traditional sail. And I remember one time in 2010, we were part of Tall Ships Challenge and going into Green Bay. And I had been with the ship for a few years at that point as a mate, but we were in the middle and we were leading the way as part of this parade of sail going into the Green Bay. But it's a river and there's not a lot of space in between the ships. But he let me take that opportunity, let me make those small mistakes that I needed to and bring her in. And I think that's kind of an example of a lot of my experience on Niagara was Walter allowing me to learn the lessons I needed to now be captain and now be able to sail the ship. So thank you, Walter.
Yeah. Hell, Walter let me break the sprit guard right off the front of the ship once. I learned a lot that day.
remember
You
that.
guys were there.
Took a year off my life sometimes, but I think it was worth it.
I think for me, it's probably a little different for me for all those obvious reasons, but it was a great thing for me to do for 2 years. I had a pretty bad experience with my previous command. It got me back into square, whereas I belong. We had a great working relationship. We still have a superb professional and intellectual and personal relationship, which I treasure. It probably healed me, because basically I got fired from Ernestina for a bunch of crap. I mean, there was no money taken. There was no, how do you take money anyway? What, you lying around bags? And it hurt a lot. And that was a very, very personal, I'm speaking very personally, guys. So I don't know what I would have done, how that would have played out without that, because it let me do my craft without being, this portfolios the chief mate doesn't have to deal with, but the craft of square rig and crew and management and doing these things, so that's what I needed to do, and this is an amazing platform to do it, and the collaborative nature of, especially, I mean, I don't know, he's probably a tyrant these days, but back then when we're just sorting this stuff out, due to Walter's, yes, you're very, very sober, rational thinker. And yes, he's a little a nut bar when it comes to being a buff for these old ships. When it comes to decision making, it's very rational. It's not just crazy gung ho stuff. It's like, let's figure this out. And it's very open minded. It's very much a calculus. And that calculus has proven incredible. His ability to manage that calculus, including all the incredible number of moving parts, which includes personnel. And I mean, that's pretty ballsy even to ask me to be made. And then I said, yeah, that's a great idea. And so there's an enormous amount of calculus which is not obvious. And this actually can't be obvious until you're doing it. And he makes it look easy, which is sort of a bit of a danger, because people think it's easy when you make it look easy. But that's a gift, and that rational thinking, building on his previous experiences, but it's not just experience. It's this thing, and the heart of it all. And so I'm very grateful. That was very. It was good for me to be there for a couple of years on a very personal level, and sort of recharged me as back to doing what I wanted to, doing what I do. So, and I'm not sure I would have agreed to go chief mate for anyone else. In fact, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have. It had to be Walter. I wouldn't have gone chief mate for. There's no one else I would have gone chief mate for. I mean, we can name a lot of names, and yeah, eagle this and eagle that. Nah, no. Get stuffed, but Walter, sure.
Well, thank you, Dan. I'm sure glad you did.
Me too.
All right, gentlemen. Well, if you all want to stay on the Zoom call after we get off live here, we can say goodbye there. But I'd just like to thank Captain Moreland and Captain Rybka for letting us pester you with questions. And it was an honor to be a part of this. And I think it's going to be viewed quite a bit of times because, yeah, it was a great time to listen to the kind of early days of Niagara and all of that. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
I'm so delighted to be surprised with Dan coming on board tonight and this afternoon. Thanks.
And thank you, everybody, for who's viewed this and will view this. And we hope you have fair winds and following seas out there. So take care.
So long.
Thank you, everybody.